So, the incident. Yesterday morning, I was reading when I heard what I swear was M laugh outside my window and say something unintelligible. I was immediately confused because I thought and then confirmed that M was miles away and wouldn't be home until late that afternoon. I thought it was weird, but I didn't feel threatened or targeted. I went back to reading, texting them both about what I assumed to be a mildly funny auditory processing error. Apparently, something like this happened to S as well. Several months back, Em had left the house, but S says that she heard the front door open, Em's voice call her name, and then the door close again. Em was once again confirmed to be 10 minutes down the road at the time. They are now both convinced that because Em is not home very often, something is trying to use her as a conduit to try and get S and I to let it in. They plan on smudging and laying down silver in the corners of the home and have expressed a good amount of fear and anxiety over it. M&S have been doing their thing a lot longer than I have been doing mine, and so I typically trust their judgment on stuff like this. That being said, there's recently been some discord in the home between us, and while it has since been resolved, I can't help but think that maybe they've jumped to the conclusion that this is something rather than nothing because of that. So I've recently been riding my bike around our local park just about every day that the weather allows. Yesterday, I had the music going and was pedaling away like usual when I came rolling up to a guy and his dog. He just kind of looked at me and smiled like we knew each other. I nodded and went on my way, but there was something about his face that stuck out. Just a coincidence, I thought. There was no way. But it looked just like my dad. This wasn't my dad that I saw last summer. Not my dad that I remember standing talking in the driveway for the last time. This was my dad's face that I remember in the hospital before he took his last breath. I made another lap around the lake and campground on the other side of the park. I came up the hill, and he was still standing there, almost as if he was waiting on me. He looked at me, waved, and smiled again. He just stood and watched as I was slow pedaling up the hill. I got to the top and paused for a second, staring at the man through my sunglasses. It felt like I knew him. I looked at him for a second before riding off. It really felt like my dad was standing there. I couldn't bring myself to say anything though for some reason. I actually passed people several times while riding. I didn't see him again on any path. This was another weird thing that stood out. He was at the top of the hill by the bridge that goes over the river when I first saw him. He was still there when I came back around, but not anywhere along the trails or there when I came up around a third time. As a side note, he was cremated as per his wishes. We spread his ashes in that river. My dad always told me stories of how his dad, my grandpa, saw ghosts. My dad never had any ghost stories from his own point of view. That I know about though. A few months ago, I would wake up and see a figure in the doorway of my room. The figure had long black hair, indistinguishable face, and a dirty white robe. I immediately assumed it was some mind trick, like seeing a belt on the floor at night and thinking it's a snake. But this wasn't the only occurrence. I saw this figure every night for weeks and could stare at it for minutes at a time. One night I even yelled on it, really freaked my wife out. After a while, my fear got the better of me and I started to sleep on the couch. I know, it sounds bad, but my wife never believed in these kind of things, and at the time I still assumed it was my mind playing tricks on me. As you could probably predict, my wife didn't take too kindly to me sleeping on the couch. One night after leaving the bedroom to head down to my safe place on the couch, I started to think that it wasn't fair for me to not sleep with my wife, and that I wouldn't let my relationship slip due to a figure I didn't even think was real. So at about midnight, I decided to head upstairs to bed. As I turned the corner of my house and faced the stairs, I saw the same figure. In the movies, people tend to react, but when faced with an unknown, unexplained entity in your home, you just kind of freeze, waiting for the formation of shapes to disappear or take another form as you change your perspective. This time, the figure never changed form and looked at me as I froze, then moved inches to the left and right, saying "what the fuck" out loud. been a week now, and I get the feeling that this thing doesn't want me to be with my family. As long as I stay away from my room, it's not a problem. So, our family had a long history with paranormal activities like claps, objects getting moved from a place to another one, and saw very strange things like a dead woman or a husband. The woman was killed by her husband, and then her husband killed himself. That told us our neighbour that lived there a long time. But that's past, and we just had to move from this old house to a newer one in the same city. In the new house, we didn't really see anything, but on special dates for our family, like somebody's death, we heard objects moving themselves or a lot of loud claps. We went to the church and it never happened again. Now, after many years, something is haunting us for a year now, I think. First, we heard claps. Then, after some months, our garderobe made strange noises. And after a year, now we see shadows of other people or something like that. I don't really know how to explain it. It's just a shadow. It doesn't look like the old man or woman, which looked very real. Sometimes my daughter says she sees somebody walking around the house, but she doesn't really say anything more. We're very scared, especially me, and we don't really know how to deal with it. What should we do? And everybody hears and sees these things multiple times in our family. And I don't think that these shadows are the popular shadow people, because our story with paranormal activities is very long, with even normal looking people or poltergeist. I don't really know how to deal with all this anymore. My father had a terminal illness. During his life, he was a bit of a nagger and a nitpicker. I joked with him that when he died, he'd have to let me know if there was something on the other side. I'm an atheist. So, about 6 months after he died, I was trying to put some metal cabinets together on my patio. The instructions were impossible, and after many hours of trying to put it together, I just said, fuck it, I've had enough, and I left it unfinished. The next morning, I found my small set of screwdrivers and an empty packet of batteries with just the one battery in it, both side by side in front of the patio door. They were both in the drawers in the laundry previously. I've had many strange things happen like this in my house, which I can't explain. The area is known for hauntings. I puzzled over it and finally worked out the message. The message was, find the last bit of energy and finish the damn cabinets. I knew this was my father nagging me. It was just what he would have done. It makes me wonder. A couple years ago, I had a sleepover at my friend's house with 3 other people, so there were 5 of us. The house was known to be quite haunted, as we have heard the garage door slam on its own and stuff like that. We decided to sleep in a game room upstairs and watch some Batman before sleeping. Let me try to explain our sleeping arrangements. There's a couch that 2 of my friends slept on, and 2 of my other friends slept in front of the couch on the floor. I slept in a beanbag sort of chair to the right of them with the TV in front of us. There's a closet close to me, and the entrance to the room is furthest from me. So we just turned off Batman and we were all falling asleep. About 5 minutes later, I hear this really deep voice say my name that is to the right of me. Now, I just thought it was one of my friends joking with me, so I didn't open my eyes. Then my friend starts frantically saying my name and telling me to wake up. She asked me to go to the bathroom with her downstairs. So as soon as we get down there, she's like, did you hear that? I was like, of course I did. That wasn't one of our friends. She says that everyone's passed out. Of course we're freaking out, and I end up sleeping next to her that night. The next morning when we all get up, I asked them and they said they didn't hear anything. I'm very convinced it wasn't my friend's dad because I would have heard him walk in. And the voice was way too deep to be any of my friends' voices because we all hadn't hit puberty yet. I don't know, it's been years and my friend still says it wasn't her. And at this point, she would have said something by now. Anyway, that's one of the scariest things I've heard. Boyfriend passed away of complications from a surgery that was supposed to help him, and it didn't. He ended up passing away in his sleep, alone. The day I found out he passed away, I was at a doctor's appointment 4 hours away from where I live. I didn't find out until I got home, which was weird, because I had the sound turned all the way up on my phone just in case he called me. I got 3 missed calls from him when I checked my phone when I came home, which is another weird thing. I never heard my phone go off. I also didn't see any missed calls all day until I got home. Here's where it might sound a little creepy, but also maybe a little comforting. He came to me and told me he had passed away the night before I heard he passed, and I didn't believe him. So backtrack to the night before I actually found out he passed away. It was about 1 a.m., and like I said before, I was going to the doctor the next day. So I texted him good night and told him I loved him, and I told him I would leave my phone sound turned up in case he needed anything. After that, I watched TV for a little while, and right when I was about to go to bed, I heard his voice in my head. Well, this might be a little weird, but it's like he took over me for a minute, because I started to say the words I heard in my head out loud. Baby girl, I'm not here anymore. I'm so sorry, but I'm all around you now. I'll always be with you. I love you, and I'm sorry. Now, this is where it got dark and scary for me. A few weeks later, I wasn't in a good place at all. I had people blaming me for what happened to him. I had others telling me to get past it because it wasn't like I was married to him. I ended up in a somewhat of a dark place. Well, one random night I was in bed watching TV, and I felt this dark, evil presence on the right side of my bed. When I would look, it wasn't there, but I could see it out the corner of my eye. At the same time, on my left side, I felt something trying to protect me. I heard my ex-boyfriend's voice telling me that it was the presence, it's just there to scare me and not to feed into. I also heard him say that my ex-boyfriend, is there to protect me. I started watching Paranormal State around that time. They said, if you're a dark presence around you, that you should be strong and tell it to go away. It took me 4 times to tell it to go away before it finally did. I changed my thinking around, eventually stopped blaming myself for his death, and also went to counselling. I can tell you now I'm in a much better place and I don't see or feel that dark feeling anymore. The people that blamed me for this apologise and say they don't blame me. That they never really did. They said at the time they blamed me because they needed someone to blame. We're all on better terms now. I've only had one encounter with an entity all my life, and that happened around 2003 or 4. It was around noon or so, and my friend and I were sitting at a small table across from one another. During our conversation, out of the corner of my right eye, I noticed someone was now sitting with us at the table. It was not a see-through apparition, but appeared as solid as a real-life human. We were in our 20s at the time, and he, apparition, appeared to be around the same age. Even though the whole event happened in a matter of seconds, I noticed his clothing, cat backwards and arms crossed as he quickly glanced at the both of us. The following is where I'm asking if anyone has any input. After I quickly observed some of the physical details about him, I turned my head to look away. This is when I either closed my eyes and observed some sort of white flash, or still had my eyes open, which I can't recall. I do recall this was about the time he disappeared, and I was overcome with a feeling of sadness and felt physically drained. I then looked up and he was gone, but my friend's eyes were wide open in complete shock as we both struggled to put in words what we've just seen. I worked in elderly care for 7 years and thought I'd share some of the things I experienced there. Not looking for advice or anything, just thought I'd share it with y'all. While it didn't happen often, it happened rather regularly, at least every couple of months, that during night shifts there were sounds without any source. The sounds of footsteps walking behind me or passing me by, without anyone who made them. Sometimes I heard the clear sound of somebody coughing nearby while I walked through one of the common areas, despite nobody being there and all doors in the vicinity being closed. The only time I was actually worried was when during one night shift, every so often I heard somebody giggling behind me. Only the giggle sounded like it came from a rather young person. It happened at least once every hour between sunset and dawn, and it always came from somewhere behind me, no matter where I was standing or where I was looking. That creeped me out quite a bit, but I experienced nothing else of that sort that night. We had exactly one movement activated sink on our floor. Both during the day and the night, it's sometimes just randomly activated, despite nobody standing in front of it, independent of the time of day. Could very well just be some sort of maintenance issue, admittedly, but considering that there was no pattern to it at all, it was rather strange. During night shifts, sometimes I would come back from my rounds to see the office chair in front of our PC moving and spinning for a little bit, as if somebody had quickly gotten up from it. At first, that made me very, very uncomfortable, but after a while, I'd gotten so used to it that I barely even noticed it. And it happened even when all doors and windows were closed, so no wind could have done that. And the elderly people we cared for weren't fast enough to get up and get out of sight before the chair stopped moving. If one of our elderlies usually rang his call bell every day at the same time for a specific reason, it wasn't uncommon for it to ring once more at the same time the day after that patient had passed. Which wasn't that bad if it happened during the day, but during night shifts, that could get a little scary. After all, you got a locked, empty room where apparently someone just pressed a button. Some co-workers chucked that up to electrical malfunction, and while that is possible, the fact it tended to happen at the same time the deceased had usually called for us led me and others to believe it was the spirit or an echo of somebody who had passed. I was rarely surprised by such things happening. It's elderly care after all, and that means that over the years, many people pass away in the same building. And in a weird way, it could be quite comforting. My earliest memory of this thing is when I was 5 years old. I don't believe that was our first encounter. My mother told me of once when I was 8 or 10 months old. She was holding me while sitting on the couch in our living room. She says I turned and looked past her into the hallway, pointed and said, "Man." When my mother turned around, there was, of course, nothing. It was just the two of us in the house. But after looking around for a bit, she found nothing out of place and assumed it was creepy baby babble. At 5, I have my first actual memory. It was weekend night around 11 p.m., and I was laying in bed restless. I could hear both my parents snoring from other rooms, and the light from the living room TV shone on my open bedroom door. A slowly moving shadow of a man crossed into the light and began to walk down the hallway towards my room. I knew it couldn't be my parents or sister, both from the sounds of snoring and its shape. I was absolutely petrified as it methodically made its way down the hall. Right as whoever was casting the shadow should have crossed the threshold of my door, there was nothing. The shadow went, but no body followed. The following years, I often had vivid nightmares which caused me to develop various fears, and I became fairly easy to frighten. I had nightmares before this visit, but they definitely ramped up in intensity and in frequency after. After my 10th birthday passed, I was laying awake in my bed after my mom had left my room after telling me good night. I wasn't able to get to sleep due to feeling of being watched. My eyes slowly scanned the dark room until it fell on my open closet door. The corner in which it was sat was opposite from where my bed was positioned. I could feel something watching me from the darkness of the open doorway. As I focused harder on that area, I could make out a fake outline of a tall, humanoid figure standing off the side of the sliding door. My mind instantly recalled the memory of the shadow from half my lifetime ago. I sat in my bed petrified. I could only lay and stare at it, eyes wide open in fear. After what felt like an eternity passed, filled only with our paranormal staring contest, its form melted back into the darkness. I didn't sleep at all that night. Now's probably a good time to give a full description of this thing. It stands about 7 foot tall with a slight hunch. It's built like a sickly 90-year-old man with every bone being visible under its pale, leathery skin. It always has an uncomfortably wide smile filled with short, needle-like teeth. Dark, sunken pits in place of eyes. Usually brings a smell of body odor and old leather. The next visit came during the summer, about a month after my 15th birthday. I always kept my room freezing cold in the summer and would often pull my blanket over my head and played on my phone while winding down before I went to sleep. I had one part of the blanket lifted up in front of my face to keep air circulating. I was laying on my side, scrolling through my phone. I caught some movement through the gap in the blanket. Glancing past my phone, I squinted my eyes to see what had moved past my peephole. I saw it smile first, as it stretched unnaturally wide across its face. Its black pits for eyes stared into me as I fully realized my paranormal stalker was mere inches away from my face. Dread and terror locked my body into place as my mind raced through a way out of this situation. I have no idea how long the two of us were locked in our romantic gazes, but I eventually settled on a plan of action. I threw my blanket off of my body and prepared to vault my body past it and to my door. As soon as the blanket was off me, it was gone. The feeling of its presence still lingered in the room, but I could no longer see it. I turned the lights on and stayed awake all night, too freaked out to sleep. So you may have noticed a pattern by now. Every 5 years he shows up and is a little closer to me. I was really concerned when I realized this because any closer and it would be touching me. Around this time, I also started suffering from constant migraines that would last for days, or sometimes weeks at a time. As my 20th birthday came and went, I wasn't really as worried about this thing showing up as I was 5 years prior. I'd moved out of my parents' place and I didn't feel the heaviness that my childhood bedroom had. About 6 months after my birthday, my fear of it returned much stronger than before. I fell asleep that night without much trouble, but I had a pretty gnarly awakening. I woke up for seemingly no reason, and that old familiar feeling laid heavy in the room. I knew I was being watched, and when I tried to move to grab my phone, my body didn't respond. This actually made me feel a bit better. I've been through sleep paralysis before, and I could do it again. I was afraid, but I knew it wasn't real. Then my body began shaking uncontrollably, and my vision went dark. When it returned, I was no longer in my bed. I was strapped to a stone table in a dimly lit room. I could faintly make out old carved stone walls and an iron door past my feet. I could smell iron and rot all around me. A figure loomed over me and I immediately recognized my lifelong stalker. It finally made it to me and I was at its mercy. It spent a long while just staring at me with hunger and malice. After some amount of time, it moved in closer and began to slowly, yet gleefully, drag its claws over my body, slicing and tearing at my flesh. I could feel each emotion as it effortlessly mauled me. Suddenly, my vision flashed and I was once again in my room, shaking and seizing violently. Every muscle in my body flexed and tightened to their absolute limits. Then, as quickly as I was returned to my room, I was stolen away to a new place. I was on the floor of a cave. There was light from a fire shining in from somewhere I couldn't see. It smelled damp and musty. Without missing a beat, my captor appeared over me and began his work anew, ripping and tearing into my body once again. My vision would then flash back to me seizing in my bedroom, then to the dungeon, then my room, then back to the cave. This cycle of torture went on for what felt like days. There was a final flash and I was in my room, no longer seizing, light coming in from my window. At first, I didn't even try to move. My body ached all over, my mind was mush, and my pillow and blankets were strewn around the room. I felt like I'd been hit by a train, but like a demon train. After that night, I knew I'd never get rid of it. It had me now. All I could think about was what would come next. Was it satisfied now that it had gotten to me? Would it come more often now? I had no idea what it wanted, where it came from, what its limits were. I was clueless and terrified. I've tried over the course of my life to figure out what this thing is, to no avail. After that night, I began having nightmares every single night. I was pretty used to having a lot of nightmares at this point, so I wasn't too torn up about it. After all, I knew they were only dreams. But one night when I was 22, that changed. Since I noticed the 5 year pattern, I'd become confident that it would only appear once after a fifth birthday. However, I was apparently wrong. Ish. As I fell asleep, I was drawn into another nightmare. As I entered the dream realm, I had the most unsettling feeling of deja vu. The place I found myself was all too familiar. I laid on a cold stone cave floor, the same cave when I was tortured 2 years prior. Before I could fully process that information, I saw it. Standing at the only tunnel out was my only old buddy. It lunged toward me and wrapped one of its hands around my neck. Its grip was surprisingly strong for its apparently measly muscles. It dragged me by my neck across the cave floor out into the tunnel. Once again, my body wouldn't respond to my commands. I could only watch as my limp body was taken somewhere. My airway was being crushed as it pulled me. My lungs screamed for oxygen. But even after several brutal minutes, my vision never darkened and I never blacked out. I had to consciously experience being choked without the bliss of passing out. Eventually, the tunnel led into a massive cave that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. I could see the firelight dancing off of stalagmites and columns in the distance. As we went in further, I even heard screams, but I never saw anyone, human or otherwise. It felt like I was in there for a few hours. I didn't know how it ends. I either blocked that out unconsciously, or there was just never an end. I'm 24 now, and I honestly don't know what to do. I still have horrible nightly nightmares and the migraines. I can feel it around me when I'm alone sometimes. I can even tell if it's in one of my nightmares with me. They feel completely different from other dreams. It's a bit difficult to explain. I guess I'm here to ask what I should do, or just an opinion on what this thing is. I've honestly hit a dead end at this point. I don't even know if I want to get rid of it. As weird as that may sound. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Thanks for your time. Hope it wasn't too hard to read. In June of 2020, I experienced a miscarriage from an unplanned pregnancy. I found out at 4 weeks exactly, then lost it at 8 weeks. The event as a whole was one of the worst things I've been through, something you can't imagine until you're part of that unfortunate club. A few months after miscarrying, I talked with my husband about getting a tattoo in remembrance of our loss. I didn't want anything with a name or a date, so I settled on a green gradient rainbow. Rainbows are popular in the pregnancy loss community, and green reminded me of nature and regenerative life. On January 14th, 2021, my projected due date, I got the tattoo. It turned out nothing like I imagined. There were miscommunications on both mine and the artist's side, and I was so bummed about the tattoo. After letting it fully heal, I shared my thoughts with my husband and said that I'd like to start the process of getting it removed and trying a different idea. It has such a personal and emotional meaning to me that I really wanted to love it and be proud to show it off. I'm a hairstylist and I came into contact with lots of different folks, and I'm very accustomed to talking about a range of subjects, even those that are very personal. I haven't shared my miscarriage with many people or clients, but a few weeks ago I did. I found myself on the topic with a girl who I've only seen twice. It was a much deeper conversation than I expected, but not unusual as many people share their lives in my chair. In the mirror reflection, she could see my inner forearm where my tattoo was located. While I was blow drying her hair, she asked what it meant. I told her it was my baby tattoo. I immediately shot my eyes to my arm and what she saw. Holy shit. The area where my tattoo had healed now clearly has 2 letters visible, HI. For 6 months I saw it as a smudge, but now it was so clear. We both sat in disbelief in a moment and got teary-eyed. I couldn't believe that this tattoo had this message on it for months, on my own body, and I never noticed it. I showed my husband and he too was in disbelief. There's no way I could intentionally make it heal weird in one spot and have it shape letters, nor could the artist happen to leave this area less saturated than the rest. It has truly shown me the power of our interconnectedness, and I find comfort in the inexplicability. At around 1:30 a.m. last night, I suddenly felt a presence right next to my bed. I closed my eyes fully and tried to control my breathing because I was about to freak out. You know how you can tell if someone's staring at you, even if your back is turned? It was like that, except I could sense like a whole person and not just the eyes. Eventually, I calmed down and I was going to try to fall asleep again when I felt someone or something press down on my bed. It was like someone sitting on the side of my bed, except it wasn't as heavy. It was more like someone pressing down with their hand. Any sleep that I was falling into dissipated instantly, and I could tell I was beginning to hyperventilate. I told myself to stop freaking out because I knew that it wouldn't help anything. So I eventually calmed down again and I decided to try and fall asleep again when I heard a rustling sound next to my desk in the corner of my room. At this point, I started to strain my eyes to try to hear if there was any other noise, but there were no footsteps or anything. Even though it seemed that the presence was moving around my room, I felt it for probably 5 more minutes until it left. By the way, when I first felt it, the sound of my fan went away, and I knew that the presence left because the sound of the fan returned to my room. I told my brother about it this morning, and he said that it could have been my cat because you can't hear the footsteps on the carpeted floor. I had to call my dad to ask where my keys were, and I also asked him if he had been in my room, and he said no. Then I asked about the cat, and he said that the cat had been outside all night. It wasn't my dog because he has a really loud collar, and it wasn't my brother because I would have been able to hear the footsteps. He then suggested that it was sleep paralysis or a dream. It wasn't sleep paralysis because I could move. I got uncomfortable when I first felt it, so I pretended that I was shifting around in my sleep to get to a more comfortable position. I also knew it wasn't sleep paralysis because that only happens when you're waking up. It also wasn't a dream because you can just tell. When you're in a dream, you can't. But in the morning when you wake up, you can recognize that it was a dream. I know for a fact that it wasn't. This has happened on 3 separate occasions so far. The first time, some of them was repeating a song I was singing along with. I was out on a walk in the forest and it sounded like my own voice, but off. It also just a few seconds off. The second time, I was walking along the edge of the forest through some wet grass. I stopped for a few seconds, but the noises of my footsteps didn't. I was wearing heavy boots and my footsteps made wet, stompy sounds. I even tried it a few times more. I would walk a few steps and stop, only for the sounds of my footsteps to go on for a few seconds. The third time happened just now, and that's what made me want to share this. It's currently summer where I live, rural Germany, so I had my bedroom windows open. I was lighting a few matches to light candles. As I put on the last match, I heard a match being lit from outside the window. I live in the middle of nowhere, and it's the middle of the night. I didn't see anyone or anything, but I also didn't want to investigate further. Honestly, I don't know what to make of all this. This has all just happened in the span of a few months. We live in an old little cemetery outside of our village that's supposedly haunted. I have some pictures I took there at night with weird orbs and light beams, if anyone is interested in that. But I haven't got a clue what this could be.